Orchids, they're just stunning, right? Some of the most beautiful and, well, diverse flowers on the entire planet. But behind all that beauty, there's this secret life, a life of really extreme risks and, believe it or not, some pretty remarkable rewards. And figuring out that secret, that's the key to solving a really fascinating conservation puzzle.
So yeah, that's the big question we're going to dig into here. Why are these amazing flowers so incredibly hard to save? I mean, with all our science, you'd think it'd be easier, right? To get to the bottom of it, we really need to understand what makes them tick. Okay, so to really get the scale of this challenge, you have to appreciate just how massive the orchid family is. We're talking about over 26,000 named species. I mean, think about that. They're literally everywhere, on every continent except Antarctica, from steamy rainforests to windy grasslands.
But here's the kicker. For all that incredible diversity, here's a number that's just, well, it's shocking. A big global review of conservation programs, where they try to move orchids to new places, found that only 2.8%, just 2.8%, actually saw new orchids successfully grow from seed in the wild. That is an insanely low success rate. So what in the world is going on?
All right, to solve this puzzle, we have to go undercover. We need to look into the orchid's secret life. And it's a life of, well, biological extremes. It's what makes them so different from almost any other plant out there.
And the very first clue? It's all in their approach to reproduction, which is, let's just say, incredibly risky. It all starts with trying to find a partner.
So take a look at this. What's absolutely wild here is how consistent that number is. I mean, look across all these different studies. Global, regional, doesn't matter. The most common number of pollinator species for any given orchid is 1. Just 1. These guys are not generalists. Nope, they are extreme specialists.
Just let that sink in for a second. For literally hundreds of orchid species, their entire future, their ability to make more orchids, is riding on the survival of a single species of bee, or a wasp, or a fly. If that one little insect disappears, poof, the orchid is done. It can't reproduce. It is a massive, high-stakes gamble.
And this crazy specialization leads to some of the most mind-blowing strategies in all of nature. One of the most famous is something called sexual deception. The orchid literally cooks up the exact same chemical sex pheromone as a female wasp or bee. Why? To trick the males into trying to mate with the flower. It's basically catfishing, but for plants. And it works brilliantly if that one specific wasp is still flying around.
Okay, so let's say the orchid's trick works. It gets pollinated. Success! But this is where we hit the second big biological extreme, and honestly, it's a bit of a paradox. If a single orchid can make millions of seeds from just one hookup, why aren't they just, covering the entire planet?
Well, it's because orchids are essentially playing the lottery. A really, really big one. They produce a mind-boggling number of tickets. We're talking up to 6 million seeds in just one pod. But here's the catch. All that pollen usually comes in one big packet from a single suitor. So all those millions of seeds, they're all half-siblings fathered by just one dad. So you have a ton of lottery tickets, but they all have very, very similar numbers. The genetic diversity in any one batch is just super low. And then there are the seeds themselves. This is another extreme. They're basically dust. I mean, they're microscopic, which is great for traveling for miles and miles on the wind. But to be that tiny, they have to give something up, something essential. They don't have a packed lunch. Seriously. Unlike most plant seeds, orchid seeds have zero food supply of their own, no endosperm. They are born completely and utterly helpless.
So what does that mean? It means a little dust-like seed with no food can't just start growing. No way. To have even a tiny chance at life, it has to land in the absolute perfect spot and immediately find a surrogate mother, a partner. And that partner is a very, very specific type of fungus living in the soil that it can plug into and basically siphon nutrients from.
And this chart really drives home just how picky they can be. Look at this. It's comparing the number of fungal partners for orchids in Europe versus Australia. In Europe, okay, an orchid might have around 13 different fungi it can partner with. But in Australia, whoa, that number plummets to just about 2. Some species down there are totally dependent on a single type of fungus to even start their life. One fungus.
Okay, so let's recap. We've got extreme pickiness with pollinators and extreme dependence on fungi. It's a lot, right? But cracking this code, understanding these secrets, is what's finally allowing scientists to write a whole new playbook for how to save them.
See, the old way, it was basically just gardening. You'd grow a ton of orchids in a nice, safe greenhouse, plant them out in the wild, and kind of just cross your fingers and hope for the best. And spoiler alert, it almost never worked. The new playbook is totally different. It's about being a matchmaker. It recognizes that you can't just save the orchid by itself. You have to save its whole network, its entire web of relationships.
And this new matchmaking playbook, it's already racking up some incredible success stories. Take this one, from Australia for a threatened orchid called Calladania colorata. First, scientists figured out its specific fungal partner and used it to germinate the seeds in the lab. Then, and this is the key part, they went out and surveyed hundreds of spots to find places where its specific pollinating wasp was already living. Only then did they plant the orchids. So what happened? The results were just spectacular. Not only did a huge chunk of the planted orchids survive, like 2/3 of them, but they started reproducing. The number of new wild-born baby orchids shot up by nearly 100% over and above the adults that survived. This wasn't gardening anymore. This was full-on ecosystem restoration.
So this matchmaking thing is absolutely crucial for starting new populations. But what about the small, isolated groups of orchids that are already out there? Well, they have another problem, inbreeding. But guess what? This new understanding of orchid biology has unlocked another powerful tool to fix that too. It's called genetic rescue.
And this quote just shows you how powerful it is. Check this out. When scientists took pollen from one orchid and put it on another in the same tiny group, the baby plants were kind of puny. They didn't grow all that well. But see those big, healthy, thriving plants right there in the middle? Those are the results of playing matchmaker between two different separate populations. Mixing up the gene pool created way healthier, way more resilient kids.
So when you step back and look at this new playbook, you realize something amazing. It reveals a kind of surprising superpower. The very things that make orchids so darn difficult, their pickiness, their millions of seeds, might actually turn out to be their greatest strengths when conservationists know how to use them.
So, what's the big takeaway here? What does all this mean for the future of conservation? Learning from one of the world's most complicated flowers.
Well, first off, it's that ecology is everything. You can't just save a species in a vacuum. You have to save its relationships. Second, the new playbook isn't about gardening. It's about matchmaking. It's about setting the stage for life to thrive on its own. Third, an orchid's weaknesses can be flipped into strengths. All those millions of seeds, they're perfect for running powerful experiments that can teach us how to save all kinds of plants. And finally, and maybe this is the most important part, this gives us real hope. It shows that even for species that are right on the edge, the right kind of science can pull them back. And that kind of leaves us with one last big thought. The orchid is a powerful teacher, right? It shows us that nothing in nature, absolutely nothing, exists by itself. It's all one giant, intricate web of connections. So, if we can figure out how to restore the complicated relationships of the world's most demanding flower, well, maybe that can teach us how to start healing all the other broken connections on our planet too.